welcome to an episode of The Grafter Show. Okay, so before I get into the episode, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Muzoti. That classical music that you just heard at the beginning and also you're hearing right now in the background was actually automatically generated by a computer algorithm. It's a pretty cool piece of software developed by an ex-colleague of mine and friend, Jeremy Leach, who just so happens to also be the guest of this episode. Now, we'll talk more about Masotti later in the episode and we'll touch on some of the details later on. The next thing that I just wanted to quickly shout out was the business that I'm actually been working on for the best part of about 4 or 5 months now in the background. It's called Stack 45. If you're into any sort of weightlifting, whether that's on a casual basis or more seriously, then you probably want to invest in some good gear, and that's exactly where Stack 45 comes in. So I personally found whenever I was getting gear such as wrist wraps or lifting belts, they would often just break or rip during normal use, and that was only from a few weeks in. So I decided to go and create my own line of products, and that's exactly what Stack 45 is. And I've personally designed all of these products as well. I've been using samples for some months now, and I'm looking forward to launching Stack 45 next month in April. Okay, now let's get into the episode. I've been out and about quite a bit, and we actually recorded this episode in a restaurant, so I apologize for any background noise. I've obviously done my best to try and edit as much of that out as possible, but there's probably still going to be some in there. However, I got a chance to sit down with Jeremy. Jeremy's a good friend of mine. We've worked on various things professionally over the course of the last few years, and he's been working on some pretty cool and interesting things in the background as well, and one of those is Muzoti. We'll dive more into Muzoti as well as some of the other side projects that he's been working on, and also talk about a few productivity tips that he has as well. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Okay, so let's just get into it. So I'm joined here by Jeremy Leach, who's a friend of mine and been working on some pretty cool stuff. Some of you may remember in the last episode I actually mentioned Muzoti at the beginning of the episode, and you would have heard some of that at the beginning of this episode as well. So I'll let Jeremy introduce himself, and then we can get into a few different things that we want to talk about.
Hi, yeah, thanks Shabir. Thanks for having me on your show. It's really interesting, and I think definitely your podcast is the first podcast I've actually heard that's played Muzoti at the beginning. So that was really, and I was very honoured that you decided to put that on there. And yeah, I guess a few other people have heard it since then as well. But yeah, like you say, I've been doing a few different things recently, kind of continuing my journey to develop myself as either a business person or entrepreneur. But yeah, it's interesting times.
Awesome. So I'm just thinking where to start, because you've got quite an interesting background. You've actually worked on a few different things, and I'll probably leave it up to you to decide how far back you want to go, because you've actually worked on a few different ventures going back quite a long way, actually.
Yep.
Do you want to start off with some of your background?
Yeah. I suppose, so if we go back to the beginning, really, I suppose I've always, as a personality, as an individual, I've always found myself somewhere between like science and art. I mean, I used to love painting, doing oil painting when I was younger. But I was also equally interested in like technology, mathematics, science in general. In fact, I became really interested in, how I could produce artistic things with technology. So using computers to help people do art or create music, or that's really where I started from. And then I think a lot of my choices about what I've got involved with have stemmed from that original direction.
Okay, and then you actually tried a few different business ventures quite early on as well.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about what you did and why you did them, actually?
Yeah, sure. So I'm trying to think what the first one was. One of the first ones I did really very early on was trying to produce. This is when I was a kid, basically when I was 17. Was at the time there was a lot of interest in these things called fractals and the Mandelbrot set, which are basically mathematical formulae that, when iterated through with a computer, that you can actually create these amazing patterns. And they were very new at the time. and I wanted to see if I could kind of create postcards of these things by rendering them on the computer that I had at the time, create these colourful fractal patterns, and then sell the postcards. So I created a lot of these things and printed them out. But I think my lack of business acumen at the age of 17 meant that I didn't really know how to market them. I remember taking them to some guy who sold postcards, and he looked at them and said, "No, then they're not going to sell here, I'm afraid." And all his postcards were of like either the beach or the seaside or people playing and having fun. So it's obviously wasn't the right market. But I didn't really know, business was very different then. You didn't have the internet, so I didn't know how to go forward with that one. And I suppose since then, as the internet came about, and I've tried other things. In fact, before the internet, I got into photography. Again, tried to market my photography. I lived in Paris for a year and got very into taking photographs at night. So all the lovely illuminations. Paris is seen as the city of light. So some of the scenery could be really quite beautiful. And so I took a lot of night photography with some, at that time, was quite expensive equipment, digital light meters and things like that. And curated a lot of the photographs that I'd created, and tried to sell them as like things to like people that marketed photographs to magazines and journals. And I followed one of these kind of courses that taught you how to do that, how to sell your photographs, that I'd got from the back of a magazine. So that was my earliest kind of introduction to trying to run a business, from following something in a magazine. And of course I got no response from any of these people. So again, that went back on the back burner, and I moved away from photography. And then as the internet opened up, I moved more into what could be done with the internet. One of the first endeavors I did with like programming was trying to build a website where it's basically an events website where people could list events to do with holistic activities. So it might be like hosting like a yoga retreat or a meditation retreat, and people could list those retreats on the website. And then the idea was to build up like profiles of event organizers, profiles of where people could run events, and then kind of match those two people together. So kind of like a LinkedIn, but for holistic events. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was another one. That was not so long ago that I did that, maybe about 5 or 6 years now. And before all of that, of course, was the computer music side of things, which was going back to the mixing of the arts and the science, which stemmed from my time in academia. That's always been a big obsession of mine, which is creating music with computers, and we can probably talk a bit more about that. But yeah, so yeah, that was a great time at university. Yeah, very interesting.
So obviously we'll get into Muzoti and the musical side of things in a bit more detail in just a bit, but I'm quite interested. So you then you kind of went into a full-time job as well after trying out various different ventures as well. So what was the thought process there? Was it more around just trying to get more of a stable income and just fund yourself essentially, or was there something else to it as well? Was it more around maybe building up your skills and doing that?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. I think when I left the PhD, which was in 1999, my immediate thought was to try and commercialize my computer music, to try and commercialize the algorithmic composition side of what I've been doing. Then after leaving, I kind of carried on working on it and tried to develop the theories a bit more, and then patenting some of the ideas. And then I went and I was going to turn that into a product itself, but I found I was so exhausted by the PhD and so exhausted by the time I'd spent, studying and working, that I felt I just needed a break, and trying to start a new company on the back of that just wasn't really working. So I decided to try and join another company, which I felt was going in the same direction as what I was. So I joined another company at the time called SEO. Great couple of guys there who'd been doing computer-generated music, ambient music predominantly. They had a product called it was called Cohen Pro, and so I joined them with the intention of helping them working with algorithmic music.
Awesome. And then you've worked on various things since then, and you've now started to get to a point where you've decided, right, you want to really pursue some of your own passions and really work on your own businesses as well. I wonder if it's just probably useful to touch on the fact that you have been working full time, and you're starting to try and get a balance between working full time to obviously pay the bills, but then also trying to find time to work on your passion projects and obviously try and accelerate the growth of that and get it to a point where you can try and make that your full time as well. So do you want to talk a little bit around, how has that balance been? And how has that gone? And what is that balance, in fact? What is that time balance that you're effectively working full time versus your own projects?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's been a slow journey to get here, and it's been a bit of development. Previously, what I'd always tried to do is I'd build up a bit of cash in the bank, and then I think, right, okay, now I've had enough of working the 9 to 5. I'm going to concentrate. I'm going to focus entirely on what I want to do, one of my passion projects for a while, and I'm going to try and take that and make that a business venture that actually works. And so I'd take off for like 3 to 6 months, and I'd work really hard on that. But essentially, that was kind of like it was like a kind of all or nothing play, right? So you have a certain amount of money. You're basically spending that money because you're living, but you've only got a window of opportunity, and so you've either got to make it work or not make it work within that window of opportunity. And then what would happen, I would find, is that I'd get through a lot of money, and I think I'm not where I need to be yet with this project, so I've got to go back into work. When you go back into work and you do another 9 to 5, then you don't often have the time to keep up the momentum that you had when you weren't working. So that's where I felt that didn't really work. But I also moved from being a permanent employee to a contractor, so that allowed me to put a little bit more money in the bank than I would have otherwise, and allowed me to build up a reserve. And then that, coupled with greater flexibility in working hours, and working with a few companies who are open to basically different kind of working schedules, I've got myself in the position now where I can actually work 3 days a week instead of 5 days a week, and I'm finding that that's much more conducive to keeping these projects going long term. I can really I can keep enough money in to pay the bills, but I can also have enough time between. So if I'm working 3 days a week, that essentially means I've got 4 days where I'm not working for somebody else. And I can use a lot of that time, not all of that time, because I've got a young son as well, who's like one year old. But I've got a lot more of that time now to really get a block of time and push hard on the projects I want to. And some instances, it's like if I'm hitting a brick wall with that, then it's actually a relief to go back to my day job for 3 days, and then come back to it again. So yeah, it offers a lot of opportunity that way, and I feel that's really been like a kind of game changer in the way I approach these projects.
Yeah, that's a complete flip on the normal routine, where obviously everyone goes through their Monday to Friday and then they're looking forward to the weekend, whereas what you're describing is actually the opposite, where you've got 4 days that you're working on something else and then you're going to work. Work is almost like your weekend and your escape from the other stuff that you're doing, which is a real flip on what the traditional working routine would actually be. I'm actually quite interested, because you're pretty big on productivity and trying to keep yourself productive. What kind of tactics have you used to make those 4 days as productive as possible? Because I can imagine myself going into that sort of routine and thinking 4 days, I've got so much time, and then suddenly I find it's the end of those 4 days already and I haven't really got much done. So obviously you've probably put a few things in place to make sure that you are making the most of those 4 days.
Sure. I mean, everything's a work in progress, and I still find that despite my best intentions, I'm not always making the best use of the time that I have. But nevertheless, things have definitely improved. I'd say one of the great things about having a young child is that it really makes you focus about the time that you do have and making the most of that time. And I guess there are two main tactics I'm using at the moment. One is actually making sure I diarize, or I basically plot out the time in advance that I need for the work that I want to do for my projects. So they're actually put in place, and then the kind of free time or time that I might spend helping my wife do things or looking after the kid has to try and fit around that where possible. Obviously sometimes it can't be done, but where possible fit around that, because I find if you don't actually specifically allocate these blocks of time, they just won't happen. There'll be something else that comes into play. So actually diarising these things is very important. And also the other thing I found is important is getting to bed early and getting up early, setting an alarm, maybe putting it on the other side of the room so I'm forced to get out and actually turn off the alarm, and have like 2 or 3 hours in the morning, if I get up early enough, 5 or 6, to actually work on my stuff, get ready, feel that I'm getting in control of the day. And once you've got a certain amount done, you then feel you can not necessarily slacken off, but you can relax a bit. Whereas if you wait till you get up at a normal time, then the kid starts to wake up, everything's already moving, and then you're just playing catch up all day. So yeah, basically forcing myself to get up earlier, going to bed earlier, and actually managing and writing down my time blocks is really important.
Mm-hmm. And then just to supplement that, actually before the podcast we were actually talking about some of the health routines and habits that you actually undergo. So do you want to just describe what you're doing at the moment and how you've actually found that helps with your productivity and probably just keeping more of an energetic mindset as well? Sure. So this is a really interesting one, but I've often been a kind of person to play around with different ways of eating to try and maximize my energy or to help my digestion improve, or various different things to improve my daily life. I've tried many diets in the past, not to lose weight, but just to optimize my health. And recently I read more and more about a ketogenic diet. And I kind of sporadically haphazardly tried this a few months ago, about a year ago now, by just eating lots of meat, because I thought that's what the keto diet was. It turns out it's not really about that at all. It's literally about taking down the carbs and replacing them with fats. So it's like your fuel source changes. It's not about more or less meat. And once I understood that, and I took the carbs way down, and then increased my levels of fats through avocados, nuts, coconut oil, etc. I found I had much more stable mood. I had less allergies, so my allergies now have kind of come down a bit. Oh, wow. Which seems crazy because usually my allergies would be full on at this time of year. So I'm quite impressed by that. My digestion improved. I found that I had less cravings for sweet things, because basically if you're not eating carbohydrates, then, and you're not eating kind of directly sugary things, then your intake of sugar is basically way down or non-existent. And when you start eating fats, large amounts of fats, you get satiated, you get much more, you feel as though you don't need to eat more very, very quickly. And that can last for a whole day. And that's what that's led to for me, is it's like I've managed to push my eating window into a very small time range. And although at the moment I'm kind of doing what people might call intermittent fasting and eating 2 meals a day, lunchtime and dinner, for a while, about a month ago, I was just doing 1 meal a day. And we even went on a holiday, and even on holiday I was doing 1 meal a day. And it was great. So Laura would have something, we'd eat in the apartment we rented, which was an Airbnb. She'd have something for lunch for herself and the kid. I wouldn't really eat anything. I just have
a bit of water with a little bit of salt. And then in the evening, we'd go out to a nice restaurant, have a full-on meal, and that'd be great. And I find that also works quite well in terms of keeping up a social life, because people usually want to socialise in the evening more than at lunchtime.
Yeah.
So that works
that's really
well.
interesting. And obviously, when you're saying you're having one meal a day, it's actually just one normal meal. You're not actually overeating, or you're not really kind of, stuffing yourself, given that you haven't eaten the 2 other meals in your day. So that's actually really impressive.
That was the really fascinating thing for me, because I was always a bit worried about it, because I thought, I'm a kind of slim guy. If I start doing this kind of intermittent fasting, or if I push down to 1 meal a day, surely I'm going to end up wasting away. I'm going to end up, being anorexic and looking like a skeleton. But in fact, that never happened. I didn't really lose any significant amount of weight. Maybe a couple of kilos at first, but I've pretty much put that back on now, as I think my body has got better able to use fat as a storage and processor. And because my digestion's improved as well, the amount of energy you have, and whether you put on weight or lose weight, is not, of course it's related to how much you eat, but it's more related to how much you absorb. And if you're absorbing more because your digestion is improved, then of course you're going to need less food. So yeah, definitely my digestion's massively improved. I had like digestive problems for a lot of time when I was like in my 20s and 30s, and that's cleared up a lot.
And obviously you found all of this has actually helped you feel just generally more energetic and supplement all of the different things that you're actually trying to achieve professionally. So you would highly endorse it, I guess.
I would highly endorse it. I think everybody needs to experiment with this kind of thing. I'm not going to go and tell people what they should and shouldn't do, because I think everybody has a different body type and it suits some people more than others. But definitely experiment. It's, I don't think for most people it's not dangerous to experiment with these things. And I found that, if I don't need breakfast and if I don't need lunch, and I can just get away with water with a little bit of salt, then how much more stuff can I get done? I don't have to think about where do I go get something to eat. I can have a short walk if I want to. Might have a herbal tea or something instead, but I can immediately get myself energized again and carry on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So let's get into some of the stuff that you're actually using your 4 days to actually work on, and I know you've got a couple of different projects.
Yeah.
Let's start off with Muzoti, because obviously I've already mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
I've used some of the music in the previous episode as well now, and I actually find it very, very fascinating, as a lot of other people do as well. So do you want to? It's been 20 plus years in the making as well, or something along
pretty
those
much.
lines.
Yeah.
Do you want to actually start off with maybe the background to it and how you first came up with the idea, and kind of what it's progressed into in today's day and age, where it's probably something different to what you probably envisioned it being back then. It's still something pretty fascinating anyway.
Yeah, definitely. So it all started when I was 17, really. I listened to music like anybody else, and I'm not a trained musician. I didn't do any study of music at school, but I was able to use computers, program computers. I had my own computer at home, and I just wondered. I thought, maybe what is it about a piece of music? It's like if you listen to a piece of music, when you analyze it, certainly a melody that has no other parts, a single part of music, it's essentially a sequence of notes, which you could represent as a sequence of numbers, right? Now, that sequence of notes, that melody can sound pretty good to the majority of listeners who are familiar with that style, perhaps. But if you just create a random sequence of numbers and you turn that into notes and play it to people, in general, for most people, that wouldn't sound good. So I looked at this and I thought, well, what is it about the relationships between the numbers in one sequence, or the notes in one sequence, the relationships between those notes that makes that piece of music sound good, that that relationship doesn't exist in the random sequence of notes. What are those relationships? Maybe I can somehow decode that, find out what that is, and maybe I can come up with some ideas, write computer programs that generate sequences that kind of build up those kind of relationships in that way, and see if they sound good, see if they sound like good pieces of music. So that's how I started. So at the age of 17, I wrote my first program, and it didn't sound great. Maybe it sounded a little bit better than like a random...
Is it like the older MIDI files with only like 2-3 different tones?
Yeah.
Like what you get on a Game Boy game, for example.
Yeah, but even worse than that, because even the composition didn't make much sense at that stage. So it was, those kind of, bleep, bloop kind of pieces of music. But
the classics.
Yeah, exactly. So that was where I started, and then obviously then I went to university and I had to do the proper computer science program. But in my final year at university, I got to do a project of my choice, and so I thought, I'm going to do it on computer music. I'm going to see if I can build a system that could compose music.
Yeah.
So I did that then, and I was very interested in the concept of a thing in mathematics called chaotic attractors, sort of non-linear equations, difference equations that basically create sequences of numbers that have properties of self-similarity. So you can see some patterns in a sequence tend to look like other parts of that same pattern. And I realized that music has a lot of those qualities. You often see the same motif cropping up in a particular piece of music. There's repetition that goes on there, but there's also variation. So maybe if I take one of these chaotic oscillators, have these difference equations, and build up a piece of music from that. Maybe it would sound like music. Maybe it would sound musical to a general population of people. So that's how I got started with that. And then I did really well in that project, and because that was a big part of my final year exam, the project, that pushed my grades up, and I think I was a bit of a disaster in the rest of my degree. So that actually saved me, and I ended up getting a 2-1 in my computer science degree and winning the computer science prize for the best project.
Oh, nice.
And if I hadn't done that project, I probably would have got a third or something and not won anything. So it just goes to show that sometimes what you're passionate about can, like you were saying earlier, tend to focus on what you're good at.
Yeah. Focus
on your strengths. And that can really save you in a lot of ways. So that then having that 2-1 degree allowed me to go on and do my PhD without having to do a master's in between. So that also saved me a year there. And then I went straight into the PhD and did that on algorithmic composition. Something I didn't really want a PhD, but I just wanted to focus on that subject and develop my ideas around it. So it was perfect for me.
And now, obviously, you've got to a point where actually Muzoti is a live website producing music using your algorithm.
Yeah.
It's also been featured on Hacker News as well, which is very, very impressive. Something you must be very proud of.
Thank you. Yeah. That was that was amazing. Actually, I had a previous like startup idea I had before, which was a website builder, which I'd written a few years back, and I put that on Hacker News. And it kind of died. Didn't make it anywhere near the first page, although it did go on to feature on Product Hunt. So I was kind of worried that when I put Muzoti onto Hacker News that it would just die and nothing would happen. But actually, somebody picked up on it, and I think they reposted it, or somebody obviously with a high karma, if you know how Hacker News works. I think they reposted it the next day, and I woke up the next day and I was checking my analytics and I thought, whoa, hang on. I looked at the real time number has gone up huge. What's going on? So I went onto Hacker News and I saw it was like featuring it like number 9 on Hacker News. I was like, whoa, what's going on here? Hacker News, shit, here we come. So that was pretty cool. And then of course the first thing you focus on there is the comments. So you go and have a look at the comments. and in total I got like 30, 39, 40 comments, and I'd say about like 80% of them were positive and encouraging, and some of them were a bit dismissive or whatever, and I don't care. I think it's good to have like really negative feedback and really positive feedback on these things, because then you get a real spectrum of people's opinions. I think like somebody once said, it's you can take criticism. It's great to be hated, but to be ignored is absolutely the worst, right? Nobody likes indifference. Give me love or hate any day.
Yeah,
but
it's a great quote, especially I guess when so many online products and services are being built and created. If you just hear nothing, then you actually don't know if that's good or bad. So that's probably a really bad position to be in.
Yeah.
Whereas at least if you're getting negative criticism, hey, at least someone's taking note and they're writing something, and maybe that could be constructive criticism for you to improve on whatever that product or service might be.
Totally. All feedback is good feedback, and that enables you to sort of carve out the niche for your product and to change the direction so that you can really match it to a market. And to some degree, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Obviously, there is, but within reason, there isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. So Muzoti is something that you're still actively working on, I guess. Are you able to share anything around where you want to take that, or how you want that to kind of progress?
Sure. So I think originally when I was back in my 20s, I had this concept. If I can work out this formula, this universal formula for music, then I could create this algorithm, this program. Just push a button and it would just churn out pop hits one after the other, and I'd be a zillionaire or whatever. And that was my business plan at the time. But time goes by, and I've realised that it's an incredibly difficult problem to solve. Is the wrong word, because it's not about creating a one size fits all solution that you never have to work on again. It is a journey, and the journey for me now is trying to create something that composers, artists, hobbyist musicians can work with for creative inspiration. Something that can, when they've got creative block, it can give them new ideas, new things to play around with, both on like a small scale and a large scale. Come up with ideas for the macro structure of a piece of music, chord progressions, things like that. But also, if they wanted to just work on the microstructure of like motifs and themes, the notes, the rhythms, then they could also work with this software, with Muzoti, on those levels as well. So it's about this concept, and I think we're going to see more and more of this now with AI coming to the fore in our daily lives. This concept of human and machine melding and coming together, so that you have these new forms of creativity, and that the generation of content, the generation of artistry is almost like a dialogue, a conversation between like humans and artificial intelligence, if you like, machine creativity, computers, the internet. I mean, after all, when you look at creativity, humans aren't this kind of like the sole, don't have a monopolistic kind of control over creativity. Life is creative. Humans are part of life. This is a subject I could talk about for ages, but
I think that's actually quite a good segue into the next thing that I wanted to touch on, which was actually Felix and Julia.
Sure.
So I just find it fascinating that we can actually use AI to the point where you're creating original things, and it could be anything. So it could be music, like we've already spoken about Muzoti. Then you're also working on another project, I guess, called Felix and Julia. And you're using AI over there to produce kind of unique geometrical patterns for clothing. Do you want to actually talk a little bit more about that? And
absolutely. Absolutely. So this started as a kind of side project and endeavor with a friend of mine called Carlos, and in fact you know Carlos as well, Shabir. So we had this idea, how could we get into like a physical product space? Because in fact most of my ideas have been around software or based around the internet, and I wondered if it's possible to create a physical product, and in the way that people do nowadays, what they call drop shipping, is where you don't necessarily don't always store the products yourself. You can have them done to Amazon or whatever. So I thought, could we do something in that space? Could we do a physical product? And I'd seen that other companies, I'd read some article about another guy who'd started selling leggings with like unique designs on them, and they were one of his biggest sellers. So we thought, okay, maybe we can start with leggings, and we can go for like a different approach to making designs, rather than use like a drawing that somebody's done, or take a photograph or an image. Why not get it, kind of meld that with AI and or generative art, probably a better expression, but use kind of like designs created by a piece of software and work with those to kind of stimulate our imagination and curate a number of designs that we liked that's come as output from that software, and use those to form the designs for the leggings that we sell on the website. So we've got this software now. It produces all these kind of crazy geometrical designs, and and it seems there's a fair amount of interest. I mean, at first I wasn't too sure of the quality of the actual, the products, the clothes, if it was going to be good enough. But looking at them and the samples that we've got, they're pretty great. My wife Laura's been wearing a pair that we got as a sample a few months back, and she wears them almost every other day. They're very comfortable, and she likes the design. So I figure that's a good vote of confidence for the business.
Absolutely, yeah. And then, so that's something that you've got going at the moment. But what are your plans in order to grow that? And I know we've spoken a lot around kind of online marketing and stuff like that. Is that something that you're also looking at the moment? Yeah,
totally. So the online side of things is still quite new to me, but I've been realizing that marketing is changing. If you want to promote something these days, you have to be focusing on online. You have to be focusing on the platforms where people are. So you have to be focusing on Facebook, Instagram, especially if you're dealing with a visual product. Something like patterns, clothing, fashion. Instagram is very, very important. And I think you have to find the right niche audience for what you're trying to sell. So we're trying to, focus on people who have an interest in geometry, architecture, design, but who also, like wearing certain types of clothing, active wear as it's called. So that's our kind of our way of targeting, our niche, hopefully niche audience for these products. But online marketing, obviously building up like an email list, doing discounts, coupons. There's a lot to get right there. But these days an individual can do a lot, or in our case there's two of us. So we'll have to see how that goes. But it's early stages on the marketing.
Yeah, so you're actually working on then two kind of side projects. You're working on both Muzoti and Felix and Julia.
Sure.
How have you found your time is split between the two? Even though now you've got 4 days, I guess, to work on them, but also, obviously you also have personal responsibilities as well.
Yeah.
I personally think a lot of people struggle even with just one side project and trying to get that off the ground and get it to where they want it to be. So how have you found working with two projects?
Well, okay, so I guess so with the music project, essentially I'm not starting that from scratch. So I've already got a lot of mental models around that. The core software for that has already been built. It's mainly about improving that now. I've already built up a mailing list with that. A lot of people know about my work already, so that's already not in terms of like generating income, but certainly in terms of generating awareness and actually doing a lot of the background work in terms of technology. A lot of that is already done, so it's not like I'm starting from scratch on that. And the Felix and Julia fashion project is also, that's two of us working on it. So again, I can kind of, it's a bit like a relay race. I can kind of, Carlos does a bit, I do a bit. We can kind of do a bit of back and forth on that and keep each other motivated. And it's a bit of a long play. It doesn't have to be, because I'm working 3 days a week, I still have income coming in, and Carlos is working as well. So we don't have to, it's not like make or break. So we've got time, and I think sometimes having a couple of projects like that gives you a chance to have a break from one when you've hit a bit of a brick wall, and you can kind of flip them so they can kind of, complement each other.
Yeah, I think that's a key point in terms of having that patience there, where you're not in a sudden rush to drop your full-time job. You actually still have that going, so you've got income coming in, and then you can focus on the side projects as being more passion projects as well, which obviously keeps you more motivated. I just see a lot of people, they try to jump in maybe a little bit prematurely and too early, where they're not really in a position to support themselves financially with a business, but they try to make it all or nothing too early. And I think that's probably a key message to take away here, is that despite yourself working on kind of two projects where arguably maybe if you did go all in sooner, it could accelerate growth. But even then, it's better to be a bit patient and work on it steadily, and obviously that helps build a more solid foundation as well for your businesses. So
absolutely. I think, as I said earlier, that's maybe one of the mistakes I made earlier on, was I would go all in on something, but I wouldn't necessarily have the right support around it. I wouldn't necessarily know the right ways in accelerating it quickly, and I just found that I spent all my money, and then I have to go back to square one again. So this is a kind of like an interesting new way of doing it that seems to be working for me at the moment.
Awesome. Okay, so we probably want to wrap up now,
Sure.
but I think before we do, let's drop in a few links and shout out to some accounts that you have. So
Lovely,
obviously we know about Muzoti. I've mentioned that before, but maybe just to reiterate, that's obviously Muzoti.com. I'll have that in the show notes. Felix and Julia as well. Is it just the website, or do you also have any other accounts related with that?
Well, we've got the usual. We've got like an Instagram account, obviously. So I think that's just Felix and Julia, and all one word, obviously. And it's the same for the website. That's Felix, FELIXANDJULIA.com. FelixandJulia.com is the website. So check that out as well.
And then do you want to shout out any other accounts as well while we're here?
I mean, there are some older projects, but they're not necessarily in the forefront at the moment, and that may kind of lead people off on wondering why they're looking as though they're gathering a bit of dust.
That's all right. I think we all have a lot of those online things. And I was listening to a podcast, I think just earlier today, where someone's bought out something like 30 different domains, and just keeping them just in case. You never know what type of project might come up in the future, which is absolutely a good way of going about it, I guess. It's a fair way, but it can be expensive on the yearly renewal fees. Unless you can somehow get some huge discount on a massive bulk buy, which you normally don't when it comes to renewing domains anyway, so you might be in a bit of trouble there. All right then, well, thanks a lot, Jeremy, for coming on the podcast, and obviously we'll look to do some more podcasts in the future, certainly doing a bit more deep diving into some of the projects that you're working on, and obviously very excited to see how things progress. Lovely. No, it's been a pleasure, Shabir. Thank you very much, and look forward to future podcasts. Thank you.